All right, welcome everybody. My name's Jessie. I'm the 2025-2026 Bushwalking New South Wales President. So thank you for having me. We'll start with an acknowledgement of country. So Bushwalking New South Wales acknowledges the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and acknowledges and respects their connection to the land, sea, and community. We pay our respect for their elders, past, present, and emerging, and acknowledge their custodianship of the country in which we take part in bushwalking and other activities. Thank you all for being here today. Seeing so many volunteers and members and devoted supporters of the bushwalking movement is genuinely inspiring, and your commitment is a testament to how deeply people care about the Australian bush, and it affirms that bushwalking is alive and thriving in New South Wales. There's so many of you that I'm yet to meet, but there's a couple of newly familiar faces there, so welcome. Kirsten, can you tell me if Alex is here yet? No? All right, so our guest speaker for tonight is Alex Alchin, but he's not quite here yet. If you just want to text him. Wait for him to jump on. While we're waiting for him, I'll jump straight into the president's report, just so then we don't have to do it later and we're not just sitting here looking at each other while we're waiting. So I don't think that there's always a president's report in every meeting, but the committee asked me to, I suppose, prepare a report that details my sort of vision for my time in the Bushwalking New South Wales committee. So I just wanted to share something with you that I had prepared, which talks about what my intention is here, I suppose. So we stand on the shoulders of a long and proud legacy here at Bushwalking New South Wales. The Bushwalkers Federation, our predecessor, was formed by clubs who recognised that while each group had its own character, bushwalkers were stronger together. And they understood that unity allowed them to advocate for access, protect wild places, and share knowledge across the state. That same spirit of collaboration is what I want to continue and strengthen. We are custodians of the Federation's history, and it is our responsibility to carry its values into the next generation of bushwalkers. I ask each of you to bring the voices of your clubs into every meeting and discussion, including this one. Bushwalking New South Wales exists to serve our affiliated clubs, and the input from our member clubs keeps us relevant, grounded, and connected to the real needs on the ground. Over recent years, and certainly in recent conversations that I've had, it's become clear that there is a bit of a divide between some members and Bushwalking New South Wales, and at times an unhelpful rivalry between clubs. This is something that we must address openly and constructively. One of my greatest hopes for my time in this role is to improve the culture of Bushwalking New South Wales and strengthen the connection between clubs. I want to see a future where clubs are proud to be affiliated with us, where Bushwalking New South Wales is not seen as an external authority, but as a unifying body, shared home for bushwalking in New South Wales, where more members feel encouraged to step into leadership and governance roles. And this begins with us sitting here today together. It begins with acknowledging that we share a common purpose, which is a love for the bush and a desire to protect, explore, and enjoy it. Our methods may differ, but our mission does not. As the peak body representing the largest number of bushwalkers in New South Wales, our influence can be enormous if we choose to act collaboratively. Bushwalking New South Wales should set the standard for how bushwalkers use the environment responsibly, respectfully, and sustainably. To move forward with clarity, I propose 3 key objectives that will guide my presidency. 1, to increase membership value. So our members and clubs should feel clear, tangible benefits from being part of Bushwalking New South Wales. That means practical resources, strong advocacy, better training pathways, and shared opportunities. Two, grow member engagement. We need to create more spaces for clubs to connect with each other, sharing insights, supporting emerging leaders, and building a stronger statewide network of volunteers and walkers. And three, improve communication with clubs. Information must flow both ways. Bushwalking New South Wales is your voice, but we can only advocate effectively when we hear from you. Clubs and their members are the eyes and ears of the bush, noticing changes, challenges, and opportunities long before anyone else. So imagine what we can achieve when New South Wales clubs work not in parallel, but together. Imagine a state where new walkers feel welcomed, experienced walkers feel valued, and every club feels part of something bigger. Imagine an organization that government, land managers, and partner groups recognize as a trusted, unified, and respectful representative of bushwalkers. We must acknowledge the extraordinary work of past volunteers who have shaped Bushwalking New South Wales and our clubs. Their decades of advocacy, negotiations with land managers, and dedication to environmental protection have delivered tangible wins for conservation across the state. From securing access to walking areas, to supporting the protection of national parks, to championing leave no trace principles long before they were widely adopted. These volunteers laid the foundations that we stand on today. The culture of stewardship, respect for country, and community leadership within Bushwalking New South Wales exists because of them. And as we look to the future, we honour their legacy by building upon the structures they created and carrying forward the values they embedded in this organisation. To everyone here today, thank you for your passion, your time, and your ongoing commitment to the bushwalking community. Together, we can ensure Bushwalking New South Wales continues the proud legacy of the Bushwalkers Federation and leads our movement forward with unity and purpose. Thank you. All right, I believe Alex is here. Is that right, Kirsten? Yes. Okay, well.
Hello.
Hello, Alex. How are you going?
Very well, very well. And thanks for the invite.
No, thank you for being here. So Alex is a former Bushwalking New South Wales president and a current map maker extraordinaire who will be presenting maps for bushwalkers. So during his presentation, if you have any questions for him, just pop them in the chat box and we'll answer them, or he can address them at the end of the presentation. Over to you, Alex.
Thank you. Now, let me just see if this is working. Can everyone hear me all right? Hopefully the volume is okay, because I'll mostly be talking and just sharing websites. So yes, for those that don't know me, I'm Alex Hulchin, a bushwalker, but also a lover of maps of all different types. Not sure why I fell in love with them, but in the early days, my dad had a Gangarang sketch map by Miles Dunphy, and that's what we used when we'd started to go bushwalking in the wild dogs and those sort of areas. And I just thought it was really interesting, and that actually led me on a whole journey to learn more about Miles Dunphy in that area, and even come across Bushwalking New South Wales when I was in 2014 invited to give a talk about a walk I was going to do. It then in later life led me to change my degree. I had started doing an engineering degree, and partway through I found out about this other subject called geospatial engineering that sounded interesting, and essentially I gave up a few years of the study that I'd already done in order to move to this degree, and it was so much fun. Towards the end in my thesis, I got to run around in the bush and find trig stations and write about them and things like that. So it was really a dream. But look, tonight, what I'd like to share is some things that I've been working on lately, just for fun, that you might find of interest, and also just explaining, how you can use these tools. So the first one I've got up on my screen is 6 maps. So people may be familiar with this. It was what was used in New South Wales for a long time by the state government. It was actually decommissioned earlier in the year, so that disappeared. But for a long time, it was sort of the go-to place for mapping and digital maps. There were drawbacks and limitations of it, but it was a little bit sad to see it disappear. I have, however, resurrected it from the dead, so you can still actually access it these days by going to 6.al3x.au, and it's all there in its former glory. So for people that like Six Maps and what it does, it's still there, and you'll see that it just has a few basic layers, a nice imagery layer, some different base maps that you can look at for New South Wales, and some useful tools like the ability to search for locations. But it has some drawbacks. That's still there though for people that enjoy it. What I've built more recently is a replacement and a website with a number of enhanced functionalities called bushwalkingmaps.com. So what this was in relation to was my desire to try and pull together as many different mapping sources that might be of interest to bushwalkers in the one place. These days it is possible to go to various different websites. For example, if you're interested in fires, you can go to Fires Near Me and have a look at that website. If you're interested in historic maps, you can go to the National Library of Australia website and look at things there. If you're interested in Strava, you can go to the Strava website and see where everyone's running. But what you'll find is that the maps that sit underneath it, the way that you orientate yourself, are often quite different. Maybe they'll use Google Maps or a lower quality topographic map that you're not so familiar with. The intent here was to provide a number of different, what I call base maps, they're the bits that generally stay in the background, with various overlays that you can then add on top of it. So you choose the base map that you're most familiar with, whether it's a topographic map or a high resolution imagery or something of that nature, and then you can add in various different layers that are of interest to you at that time. And I've just built it for my own personal use, but I have people now that are using it as well and getting a lot of value out of it. So what I'll do is I'll just explain some of the functionalities and how I use it. And you're welcome to follow on or afterwards start using the website as you wish. So it's pretty basic, loads up. It also does work on your mobile, a little bit smaller, but it does work there. And in the top right, we have what's called the base map section. So these are those underlying maps. This one here is the standard, what's called Six Maps Topo, which has been around for a long time. Next down, you've got what's probably more familiar and similar to your printed maps, which is the raster topo one. So if I zoom in, you can see it's got that standard grid squares and normal sort of display that we're familiar with for our topographic maps. And then we've also got what's called the Series 1 maps. So these are an older series, probably from the 70s and 80s that were developed in New South Wales and made available. And what's always interesting about going back to older maps is often there's features there that you wouldn't see these days. So maybe a place name's changed, or maybe something that used to be a road's now disappeared from the map, or a walking track. And it's always interesting to look back at that history. Again, we've got imagery layers that you can look at, and then some other ones that aren't necessarily New South Wales based. So for example, there's one here called Open Topo Map. So this is a global data set, sourcing from what's called OpenStreetMap, which is a collaborative mapping service, and someone's added some topography to it. And what you'll find is there might be tracks there that aren't present in the official mapping sources. So that's always interesting. It's probably most useful in urban areas and on tracks that maybe change a little bit over time. But what I find is that I'm always looking at different base maps when I go to an area to try and see what's there, particularly if I haven't been to an area before and I'm just trying to understand. Some other ones that might be of interest, for example, if I zoom out a little bit, we even have the current Australia as it is currently. If it'll hopefully load in a moment, that's a live imagery of Australia. You can see we're starting to get dark on the east coast, and the west coast there is all in light. But it's just amazing what information's out there that you can make use of. So that's sort of an overview of some of the base maps that are there. But if I go down and for example, keep our raster topo, I'll now talk through some of the overlays that are available. So I've got quite a few you can see, and sorry, hopefully you're actually able to see enough of my, maybe if I zoom in a little bit, that might be a little bit better, enough of the website. But the first things that I added were historic topographic maps. So I've over time collected a lot of historic topographic maps. People might be familiar with what are called the inch to the mile series, which were essentially developed by the military from about 1915, 1913, all the way through to World War II, where a lot of them were created. And they're really works of art. So they're included here. So there's a whole listing that I've got here. And sorry, I live in Sydney and I go mostly bushwalking in the Blue Mountains, so that's where I've started to base everything from. A lot of layers cover the whole of the state, some of them cover the whole of the world, some of them only other areas. So in this case, it's mostly focusing on the Blue Mountains for these ones. But for example, if I bring up this Jenolan map, so straight away I've got this beautiful old map from 1942 of the Jenolan region. And then I can use a slider to easily change and look between the current state and what it used to be. And you can see lovely features that you might not have seen otherwise. Being able to look at these older maps, I just have always found of interest. But up until now, they've generally been on its own website, or you've looked at them on paper. You haven't then been able to compare to what's there currently. And I find that of a lot of interest. So they're the inch to the mile series. I also have what we call the 2 inch to the mile, which are a bit more advanced when they load up, and some people might have those at home. And then a number of other series, which you can look through at your own pleasure. Some of those military ones, for example, have different names when you go to the Northern Wallamai. Again, a long-term Federation member, Bushwalking New South Wales member, Wilf Hilder, was involved in putting some of the names on the maps up north, these military maps up here. And you can then look at those names as their place that might be different from what we currently have, for example. So, those are of interest. If I then move on from the historic topographic maps, another area, for example, is parish maps. So you might know or heard of the concept of parishes. Essentially, when we divided New South Wales up into regions, we had parishes. Counties was the larger region, and then within that were parishes, and that's what was used from a surveying perspective to divide up land. So again, all these parish maps from this area have been included, and they might be of interest to some people. For example, you can go have a look here. Okay, this is an urban area. You can even see the names of people that own properties. So if you're doing some family research, that's a great way to try and find out who might have owned land in the past. But it's always interesting when you look at some of these maps that are in more bushland areas. For example, if I go this one, the parish attorney, it was very basic. But it's still of interest. For example, you can see this feature Bull Island Gap and an old track that says doubtful in brackets there. So maybe it wasn't that easy to follow. I've also got some other historic bushwalking maps there, like the Gangarang sketch map, which I referred to previously. So this is the one that was available that my dad shared with me, and I just really fell in love with. And again, it's very easy to just change between what's currently there and what was there in the past. If I move along, so obviously that's great if you just want to look at it on your computer. I've also got the ability to download various different topographic maps that exist. So, for example, New South Wales still produces topographic maps, and there's various years for which they exist. That series is completely available here. If you just click on any of these little numbers, it'll go download it, and you can save that to your phone or print it off or things of that nature. So they're all available. But I've also got Geoscience Australia, which covers the whole of Australia in various levels, 50, 100, 250, and also the older topographic, those military maps that I was referring to, and this sends you to the National Library where you can also download those there. So moving on from the older historic maps to some other data sets, this is probably my favorite one, and this is called the Esri Hillshade. So Esri is a mapping entity, but essentially what they've done here is produce based on high quality LiDAR data, which is sent out from a plane and essentially surveys everything on the ground. They've created a relief map, and you can really see in detail all the topography that you just wouldn't be able to see normally from a topographic map. So for example, here, if I zoom in, I can see that there's a point here. This is some sort of boulder that's sitting there. I can see in other areas that the land has slipped away, for example, or I can find little creeks and canyons that I wouldn't otherwise be able to see. I've spent many hours looking at this map and finding new areas to go and explore. Because if you compare this, for example, to the topographic map, the level of detail is just so significant. You can just see so much more from this hillshade map, and I find it really useful. So a great one to go and view and explore. Some other similar ones is just this one here I'll show, which is from an external provider called CalTopo. They're based in America, but what they're showing is essentially steepness. So it's an interesting way that you can quickly see whether there's cliff lines and things of that nature. Essentially, if you follow the bits that aren't red, it should be easy enough to walk down. That's the sort of intent that they're trying to convey. There's a bit of art and science to it after that. But again, that's an interesting way, particularly when you're trying to plan off-route walks, that you can explore that. I'll now go along to vegetation. So again, vegetation is an interesting one because it can definitely impact the type of walking experience you have when areas are scrubby. So this is using the latest New South Wales statewide vegetation mapping, and essentially the colours equate to different vegetation types. So you can see, and as you'd expect, for example, areas in valleys might have one vegetation type, and things up on top of cliffs have another. But if you get to know what those vegetation types mean, you can quickly understand whether an area might be scrubbier than another area, and for example, to avoid those certain vegetation types. This one here is really interesting. So the section that I have here is about fire. So either current fires or past fires. The first one that I have is planned RFS burns. So obviously sometimes RFS schedule hazard reduction burns in advance, and you can quickly see where they are. So I can see here, okay, near Lithgow, it's planned over a long period there, but they've got one that they've planned, and I can know to avoid that area, for example. In addition to that, we also have current bushfire boundaries. So you may know that there's actually a number of bushfires that have already started for this season. There's a few down south on the coast. This one here is up near Wallamai, or starting to get to that area. And you can see the current boundaries in this red area. Obviously there are other websites that show that, but it's a lot harder to work out where it's placed without having that topographic map sitting underneath. So I find it really handy. There's also what's called DEA hotspots, and this is essentially coming from a different type of satellite and refreshed on a regular basis, and it's actually showing based on what the satellite's detecting where the fire is currently. So you can see that it's actually spreading towards the north, and it's an active fire, obviously, because you're still getting those hotspots. The other thing that I have here is also historic information. So, as we may know, the 1925s were really significant. These layers here show a few things. They actually show imagery from that time, really high quality imagery. So this is imagery with some coloration. Essentially, the purple areas are areas that got burnt, and the darker the purple, the more it was burnt, and the green was areas that were less burnt, which is quite interesting because, for example, if I go and zoom in here, you can see very clearly which areas here were touched and which areas were not. And obviously you can use that in relation to planning your walks because that can have a big impact. There's some similar layers here, which essentially just show the same thing, but just in a grayscale. The dark being areas that weren't so much burn, and the white areas being those that were, which was really significant. There's also some layers around previous and older fires. So, for example, I can look at fire severity mapping from 2017 and 18, and I can see people might know the Royal National Park had some big fires. That was significant burn there, and that's why it's coming up in black. But yeah, that's what happened in that fire season. I can go to obviously the 1921s, which show about everything. But yeah, that one's quite handy. So moving on from fire, another one that's of interest to me is geology. So geology is great when you're trying to look for canyons. That's one thing of interest to me. So this actually shows the different layers of the geology, which can add some interest to your walk, particularly if you're looking for those certain bands where canyons exist, or certain areas where you might get different vegetation types. And I know some people that actually use the geology layer to go find features that might be of interesting to visit, because often the geology might be interesting on the ground, things you can actually see, or it might lead to different vegetation types. If I keep going, some quick ones here, for example, canyons that are known and recorded can quickly be seen. And there's also some information on stream gauges, for example. So you're able to see easily latest river heights for streams, which again is a great one. It's quite handy. Trig stations is always a favourite for me. There's lots of them in New South Wales. This one here also gives you the ability to see some information about what type of trig station it is, and also download a sketch map. So if you can find them on your walks, it's worth downloading this, because it actually has some additional details about the trig station and some marks that sit near it. Moving along, we have some other data sets. This one's here from the Geographic Names Board, whenever they've got new proposals for place names. There aren't any at the moment, so I'll leave that for now. And this one here is one of the bigger ones. So this has various different types of boundaries. So you've got the parish and county ones that I was talking about before. But some of the most interesting ones relate to trying to understand access to areas. So that's where there's a government property and a government property excluding Crown land ones that are interesting, and also some Crown land layers beneath. So for example, if I select this layer, essentially everything in purple are areas that are either controlled by the government, whether it's a state forest, whether it's a national park, whether it's owned by a government entity, or it's Crown land. And you'll see that there's many other areas than what you might have expected there otherwise to be. Not everything that's publicly accessible is national parks. We have lots of different types of land tenure. Just because it's government owned doesn't mean that you are able to access it. But on the Crown land side, a lot of Crown land is accessible. So this is a great way to try and understand those areas that exist. Another one that's of relevance to some people, for example, is declared wilderness. Sometimes that's a bit of an item that people like to know, because there's different rules around what you can and can't do outside of wilderness generally. So always good to keep those in mind. And this NPWS all managed layer is always of interest. So for example, the green ones generally are national parks, but NPWS has other land, for example, that they might own, but it's not declared as part of a national park yet, like this piece here. And that shows up clearly that that's the case. It's always interesting that you can see, for example, areas that, might not be national parks yet, but are ready to be acquired, or have been acquired and ready to be added. So that's an interesting one. I'll now just talk about Crown lands quickly. So Crown lands are all those leftover bits that were never alienated from ownership by the Crown, and they're generally for public use. There's various different types, but this layer here, Crown lands, all shows all the Crown land that currently exists or still does exist. And you'll see that there's all lots of little bits everywhere. One bit that stands out is what people might know as paper roads or Crown land roads. And if you zoom in Sorry, these are like the little lines that you often see within maps. And essentially they're bits that were left between the portions that were owned by people so access could still be provided. Some of those have been sold, and there's a whole bit around Crown Road sales, which I've been involved with, trying to bring visibility as to when they're occurring. But in this case, it's quite useful because you can often see where access is permitted that you wouldn't have otherwise realised. So, for example, down south, you may be aware of Corong Arch and Lagoon, that area there. That had some access issues. So if I search for Corong, just quickly, now I can go to Corong Peak. Oh gosh, it's wrong. Corong Peak, the homestead. I want to go to the mountain. Nope.
Corang, Corang.
Oh, thank you. Obviously can't spell today. There we go. Coorong Arch. Perfect. So if I bring up the Crown Land layer, you can see, for example, that there are crowned roads that access into areas that are of interest, and that this river here itself, the Coorong River, is actually Crown Land. So all those areas are publicly accessible. So it's quite a handy layer to look at. Just quickly, we also have some historic imagery. So there's whole layers that cover large areas of the state of beautiful historic imagery that you can look at. And that's great to see when things might have changed or things from the past. So for example, there's a layer here that shows large areas of the Royal National Park. And you can see, how things have changed. So if I zoom in to an area here, you can see that there's new tracks that weren't there before and now are. If you compare that to the current maps, you can see where things have moved. But there's also photo points that are available. So all over Australia, the government took photographs with planes, and each one of these points represents an old historic photograph that you can then view. So there's some beautiful ones, for example, of the Burragarang Valley from the 30s before it was flooded that are accessible and of real interest. The final ones I'll just talk to are Strava. Strava is always an interesting one. So that's where people can upload walks that they've done, generally rides and things of that nature. But this heat map here actually shows activity of where people have been, and it's a great indicator of areas that might be of interest that may not be mapped. That's a handy one. And there's also, for some people that are interested in older topographic matters, there's topographic grids, but also for older map series. So if you know about the older grid references that might exist, this is the grid reference system. So you can actually look up older grid references that way. The final functionalities are the ability to draw features and actually save those. You can save them or get a link and add things like labels and text. So I find it quite useful whenever I'm planning a walk. I can create that, get a link, and then share that with someone else so that they can then see where we're going. So that's a quick overview of, an overview of that website and all its functionalities. So hopefully that was of interest. I'll just quickly talk to one final website that I've recently built, which is called the National Parks Alert Map. So NPWS put out alerts in relation to park closures, fire bans, and things of that nature. But it's quite hard. I find it quite hard to understand where that actually applies to and to easily find those alerts. So what this website does is show that visually. Everything that's in blue is something that has a current alert. So for example, if I go, okay, I want to look at Royal National Park, I can see quite easily that there's a few closed areas there currently. If I look at this area, for example, it has a park fire ban, okay, and I can click to view more information. You can also, for example, if I want to see which areas currently don't permit fires, the parks that are in blue don't, so they have a current fire ban active. And you can also look at upcoming alerts as well, which is quite useful if you're interested in closures that might be occurring in the future. It's able to see that. Again, that's publicly accessible and just at npws.bushwalkingmaps.com. So with that, I might stop talking. Hopefully you've been able to follow along to some extent and at least have a bit of an overview of what's available. I guess just in summary, it's a lot of fun to go out there bushwalking. It's also fun to sit at home and look at information, and that's what I enjoy doing. But it's also important to just think about planning, and a tool like this can really help you with that. And that's what I enjoy doing. So thank you. Oh my gosh, there's a few things in the chat, it looks like. Shall I go through the chat? Yes, you can use it on an iPhone. It's primarily better on a PC. Yes, desktop and iPad works. Rob Lee, for some of the layers, I do need to improve the way that you can see what the coding means. And that is something that I am working on. When creating output files, PDF print to map, can you add a grid? Unfortunately not, but that's a functionality that I'd like to add in the future, is the ability to easily print that. There are other mapping websites that do that, just not mine. Will you be adding maps of other areas? Yes, if you tell me which ones to add, I can add them in, David. Is it possible to add forestry proposed logging compartments? Probably. I can probably do that, Rob, and maybe if you contact me, I can discuss that a little bit more. Yes, so the Crown lands, when you talk about leasehold land, the layer there also shows whether there's a lease or license over the land. So if you add those in, that will give you an indication whether there's any other considerations that you need to give. Thank you again for the Korong things. I should add in GPX files. I don't yet, I'm sorry. The sell-off of Crown roads between paddocks, yes, it does occur, and we do need to be vigilant. There used to be a website which I would ingest from and actually display on the map showing all upcoming objections. However, that has disappeared. Our beautiful tracks and access officer from Bushwalking New South Wales is on top of it though, and is trying to ensure that we have some more visibility on what's proposed for sale. You can upload your own, not GPX, but I will add that in. You can add what's called a GeoJSON layer. That's definitely available. There's also ways to import your own other layers that might exist on the internet, which I can't quite cover here. It's essentially free to me for run, so I think it's fine long term. I don't think it'll go away, and all the code is on the internet in case someone wants to copy it and run it themselves. Yes, I will add kilometers, which I don't currently have. That's not a feature. And yes, all the data is generally in New South Wales. We're very fortunate that we have an open data policy by default for the state government. You'll find that some other states definitely not the case. So they'll have mapping data like in Western Australia, but it's definitely not available freely. So it was one of the easiest states to work on from that perspective. Whether the layers are in UTM, it uses a different coordinate system, but yeah, I can't, yeah, send me an email, happy to talk. Were there any other questions? Sorry, it's sort of rushed through all that. How do you find, I do it for fun at night. Yes. Yes, but look, thanks for the interest, and appreciate the opportunity to talk, and welcome any feedback, because I don't know what else to add. So if you've got ideas, always happy to work on them. No, probably not an app. Yes, you can alter the transparency by sliding the little slider for most of the layers that make sense for that to be the case. But not all of them. Yeah, okay, I'll stop. Thank you.
Alex, can I jump in? Sorry, as usual. Thank you so much for that presentation. I just want to let everybody know That's one of our most popular presentations ever. And everybody's stuck around, so they've really enjoyed it, I can tell.
All right, Alex is just putting those links into the chat. If you want to copy and paste them from there so you don't lose them. Thank you so much, Alex. That was fantastic. I was actually having a click around as you were talking and looking through some of those, so that's really good.